What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the new best duo class tier list in Dark and Darker after the new wipe. So this game in general has bunch of fun and overpowered classes to play, and we have a very unique variety to choose from. But the big question is, which classes are actually good for you and the specific activities that you want to do. So I've done a bunch of testing and here are the best classes that you should try out. Let's go to the first S tier class, which is the Bard. A Bard uses music to confuse or entertain crowds of enemies, making them a strong support type of character that excels at distracting enemies. They also can heal their friends and give them temporarily buffs, making them an excellent addition to any team. However, their noisy profession makes them one of the least stealthy classes. But with their amazing buffs, they're even stronger to play by yourself. Bards are pretty tricky to master because of their core gameplay mechanics. This will require for you to pluck the correct notes by timing the right mouse button presses. Although if you can overcome these challenges, then you might find yourself a highly effective alternative to other support-based classes. I found the Bard to be rather slow and inconvenient when it comes to changing instruments mid-fight or even playing them. Of course, such perks as the dancing feet and reinforced instrument will help a lot, but they are only decent healers and debuffers, as they can only deal melee damage. It would be best to use Bard alongside the cleric, boosting its clarity stat, which would be much more useful in the group play. But with that said, as you can still do damage while being a support, and the smallest impact for your gameplay comes from the gear that you're wearing, so this is a very powerful class to play for every single content. Bard's pros are that he has very good crowd control, he has very powerful buffs, he has the highest potential luck stat, and lastly, he's a very good swordsman. And for cons, he has low damage bonus. He's very loud, so enemies will be able to hear you much easier, thus having a higher risk to get third-partied. And finally, you will be substantially weaker if you don't utilize your OP buffs. Next up we have the A tier, and the first class that gets to be in here is the Fighter. If you like to fight with your fists, but don't want your stealth to be affected as much as it would be with the Barbarian, then the Fighter class is for you. He is the only class with two starter items, which is a sword and a shield. Not quite as strong damage-wise as the Barbarian, and with lower health, but the Fighter has better agility, so they're more balanced and stronger overall. Which specific Fighter perks and skills you equip will also reflect this balance, as it covers a wide range of playstyles, whether increasing your movement speed, reducing damage taken, or recovering your HP slowly. You can mold the Fighter around your strengths and weaknesses. He's got access to a vast selection of both weapons and armor, which allows you to achieve balance and flexibility. Its dual wielding perk allows you to equip a weapon in each hand, thus increasing his damage output. Alternatively, you can wield a shield for increased defense. Fighter is also one of the few classes who has the ability to heal itself, but this class can be effective only against melee enemies. Overall, the Fighter is a jack of all trades. He is well versed with a multitude of weapons and armaments, so he can hold his own against any class. So then for the pros, he can equip almost every single armor and weapon. And if you use the Weapon Mastery perk, then you can literally equip every single weapon in the game. Then he has as well-rounded attributes. But on the other hand, for cons, he's very gear dependent. He cannot cast any spells, and finally he doesn't have great blocking and parrying, which is a big part of their kit. Blocking is difficult to pull off consistently due to the directional blocking system in the game, so it will take quite some time to get used to. Then for the next A tier class we have the Wizard. This is a damage dealing magic user who uses spells for attacking enemies, although you always have the option for blunt force to smash your enemies with your magical staff. However, a wizard's magic is their most potent offense, meaning that one of your skill slots must include the spell memory skill to set more spells at once. While there are certain perks and skills you should always equip, you have at least one perk slot available to choose from that is up to a personal preference. If you specialize in fire magic, then there's a perk to help with fire lasting longer. If you want to use arcane magic specifically, then there is a perk to buff the damage as well. Whichever one you choose, you will be a force to be reckoned with, although a wizard's defense is as fragile as a tissue paper. Casting spells is a great alternative to dealing ranged physical damage, Although there are few drawbacks to this class, in comparison to a ranger or cleric. The wizard's best skill is the meditation, which allows him to immediately restore his spells. This is the only class in the game with this kind of ability. Although wizard can be very effective against enemies with heavy armor, its own strength and health are very low, so it can be very hard to survive without the cleric in your party. Overall pros are that you can cast very powerful spells. You also will get access to meditate, to refresh your spells. And lastly, you can wield magical weapons. But then for cons, you have very slow interaction speed. In general, you will deal very low physical damage, and you have very low max HP. And for the last and final A tier class, we have the Ranger. He is among the most popular Dark and Darker classes, allowing you to shoot down dangerous enemies at a distance. Their starting weapon is the recurve bow, which is one of the best starting weapons available. They also begin the game with a campfire kit that allows you and the rest of your party to rest and recover. That is, if you can find a secluded enough place to do it safely. Generally, the Ranger's perks and skills rely on using the ranged weapons and attacks. For example, you can fire 5 arrows simultaneously in a spread pattern with the multi-shot skill, or perhaps speed up your next projectile when attacking with a long-ranged weapon. If your party has a cleric, then the Ranger is a fantastic companion class that can spot danger from afar and replenish their allies' healing spells. This class is amazing for solo and group content, as ranged damage allows you to deal with enemies at a distance, and thus protecting you from receiving damage, of course unless you get overwhelmed. This is where Ranger becomes very valuable, especially since he can shoot through holes in doors. The Ranger's best perk is tracking, which allows you to detect enemies' footsteps, and its best skill is the multi-shot, which allows you to shoot 5 targets at once. Rangers can also heal themselves by foraging food or by setting up a campfire. Overall for pros, we have that he is relatively quick with the bow. As I've mentioned, he can track enemy footsteps and set up traps. He also has the ability to quickly start campfire. And if you use the field duration skill, then you will receive high burst healing. But then for cons, he has very few of them, which is that he cannot equip most melee weapons, and he has very low damage if you do choose to wield that melee weapon. And finally, you never want to be close to your enemies, so you will have to always constantly run and shoot. Next up we have the B tier, and the first class we have in here is the Barbarian. Of all the Dark and Darker classes, the Barbarian is the toughest guy on the block. They're beefy melee experts who aren't afraid to get up close and personal. While the Barbarian is competent with many weapon types, I recommend using a battle axe as their primary weapon. Barbarians are slow, and there's no real way to improve their base speed. However, there are ways to buff the rest of the Barbarian key stats, focusing on strength, health recovery, and the impact power of your axe strikes. The Barbarian has the most strength and health of all the other classes in Dark and Darker, but that's not all he's got. The Barbarian's 2 best perks are the Iron Will, which protects it from the magic damage, and Smash perk, which allows him to break doors. His best skill is Warcry, which increases his own HP as well of his allies. But other than that, Barbarian is a slow class with no ability to cast spells and no significant buffs. This class will only survive in a well-built team, or only in the hand of a hardcore solo player. Overall, his pros are that he has the highest HP in the game. Then as well he gets extra damage bonus when wielding a 2-handed weapon. He is also good against magic with the innate magic resistance and fast magical interaction speed. And lastly, he has strong buffs and debuff skills. But then for cons, he has very slow base movement, slow attack and interaction speed, and finally, he is the least ranged friendly class in the game. Then for the next B tier class we have the Rogue. This is the most agile class in the game, but what they lack in health and strength, they more than make up for it in movement speed and agility. Their quick attacks can dish out some serious damage if you know what you are doing. Rogue has also limited access to ranged combat, as they will start with 3 throwable knives. Of course, a rogue specializes in stealth, which allows for some excellent perks and skills, including the ability to steal items from enemies, or pick locks without requiring a lockpick. They're perhaps a bit harder to use in combat than any other class, but being able to hide from your targets can make PvP fights a little bit more unpredictable. If you are perhaps tired of slow, clumsy characters, then the rogue should be your number one choice. The best perk for rogue is the poisoned weapon, which allows you to detect and disarm traps. Rogue's best skill is the hide, which basically makes him invisible. Overall, he's a great class, although you might find that a damage is a bit lacking and he has no access to spells. So for pros, we have that he has very high attack and movement speed. He can quickly interact with objects, while also picking locks and detecting traps. And on top of everything, he also moves very silently, by using the creep perk. But then for cons, he has very low health. He has significantly lower damage bonus and lower magic resistance. And finally, he has very limited ranged weapons to choose from. So then moving over to the cleric, and we will place him right in the B tier. Cleric is the main healing class, requiring those who take on the role to monitor how their teammates are doing, and if they need medical assistance. The cleric also wears many other hats, as they can heal and revive teammates, and can also deal tons of damage to the undead enemies with the right perks. So by playing the support role, you still get to use your main utility, you can deal significant damage, and lastly your gear is least impactful. You will need to equip a spell memory skill in one of your slots to cast your healing, reviving or buffing incantations. But this is just a small sacrifice to get the very best out of the cleric. Initially, you can use up to 5 spells, but you can add 5 more by equipping the spell memory. However, better magic has a higher equip cost, so you should consider which ones are essential for your party's needs. The ability to revive or heal yourself and others plays a significant role in Dark and Darker group play, and that's why Cleric can be considered to be a very important class, although not very efficient in solo play. If you like to have a wide choice of armor and shields, then the Cleric's got you covered. Its best perk is the Undead Slaying, which boosts all of your damage against the undead by 20%, and his best skill is the Undead Purification, which functions like an AoE against the undead. So overall for pros, we can cast healing and protective spells. You're able to equip plate armor and blunt weapons, as well as having the ability to resurrect an ally without consuming an altar sacrifice. But then for cons, he has very slow attack, interaction and movement speed. We get low damage bonus, and he gets very limited ranged options to choose from. And that's about it. And then for the last and final B tier class we have the druid. Druids in Dark and Darker are more combat focused alternative to the cleric class, with the ability to shapeshift into various forms. This transformation will give you great combat potential, and the ability to cast spells to heal yourself and allies. They also offer the ability to zone enemies using the Chant, Entangling Vines and the Thorn Barrier spells. They have high mobility and also are great at running into and running from combat. Overall, Druid's weapon of choice are the Staff and Spear, and for pros they have that they're able to shapeshift into various animal forms. You can as well utilize nature spells for healing. They're excellent at using spacing and zoning tools, as well as having the highest mobility in the game. And finally, you have a very powerful escape perk called the Dream Walk. So when you take damage while in the human form, you gain 5 magical power for 3 seconds and become spiritual. This will allow you to pace through targets and become invulnerable, so you can't take any damage. But of course, at the same time, you won't be able to attack and use skills either. And then for cons, we have very limited equipment choices, but at the same time very dependent on that gear. And then for the last and final class, we have the warlock, which deserves to be placed right in the C tier. This class is a magic user who channels his power through sacrifice, summoning hellfire and weakening their enemies. While nowhere near as explosive in damage as the wizard, they are a lot more durable. Unlike wizards, a warlock can use swords and other single target melee weapons with ease. He is the only other offensive magic user outside of the wizard. His ability to temporarily escape reality to get some distance is vital to their survival. The warlock has a very strong hellfire spell, which functions as a powerful AoE attack, but it's really only effective mostly in PvE. The rest of his spells and perks are underwhelming, although surprisingly enough, he has a healing perk called the Torture Mastery, which functions similarly to a lifesteal, but in this case it's based on a damage from the Curse of Pain. Overall, this class is very good because people can do Cave Trolls at level 1, and if you headshot someone with a Staff and Blow of Corruption skill, then you're still gonna do really nice damage. And from all the starting classes, By picking this one, you will get really nice gear and amazing stats. So for pros, he can cast curses to debilitate enemies. Warlocks also get access to anti-healing, self-healing and multiple physical weapons. You can also do high melee burst damage, and can easily fight every single boss in the game. And then for cons, you will have to use health when casting spells. But if you consume too much health, then you can die, so be careful. And finally, warlocks are very susceptible to ranged enemies.